Ephesians 2:8-9. For it is by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not from yourselves. It is the gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast.
That might be one of the first passages I ever memorized, Ephesians 2:8-9. I want to continue our study this morning on the grace-filled events that led to the crucifixion of Christ. So this morning we'll be in John chapter 8, the Gospel of John chapter 8. A man was in an accident at work and he injured his shoulder and decided that he's going to stick it to the insurance company. You know what I mean? He wasn't injured that bad, but he's still going to see what he can about trying to get some money out of it. So he finds an attorney that's willing to go along with him, and they end up in court, and the insurance lawyer, the lawyer for the insurance company, begins his conversation with this gentleman. He says, "Mr. Smith, I understand you were in an accident at your place of employment. By extending your arm up, can you show me just how much you can use your shoulder at this time?" And Mr. Smith went, "About that much." He says, "Thank you. Go ahead and put your arm down." He says, "Now I understand before your accident you had full mobility. Can you show me how much you were able to lift your shoulder then?" He says, "Sure. I used to be able to do that." You ever been caught red-handed? You ever been caught red-handed? You know what I'm talking about. You're humming along the highway, or you know it, there's some blue lights flashing in the background, right? You look down, speedometer says 72. You just passed a sign that said 55. Isn't that a wonderful feeling? If you're anything like me, your wife's like, "I told you to slow down 10 minutes ago. I don't know why you didn't." Right? Right? Sandy's going to fuss at me later for that, by the way. You can't have anything to say. You can't defend yourself. He's got radar. You see what you're doing. You're caught red-handed. You know, when we do something wrong, the effects are often long-reaching. Simply put, sin makes an impact. Today's passage, a specific sin comes to the forefront in our scriptures. The sin this morning is adultery. You can pull that word out and put a number of sins in there, and I believe Jesus would have acted in the same way. But specifically here in John chapter 8, verses 1 through 11, the sin is adultery. You need to understand that adultery is sin because it mocks what God has designed. You see, God intended for marriage to be between a man and a woman for a lifetime, and He did not intend for that to ever be broken except by death. You need to know that adultery is betrayal. It's the breaking of an exclusive promise of loyalty and love for one specific person. The effects are devastating. Adultery will wound the spouse, it violates marriage, and it destroys society. Adultery wrecks homes, it injures innocent children, and it often breaks up friendships. More importantly, it attacks what God holds dear. Adultery is very hurtful, and it's very hard to forgive. So when this woman who is caught in adultery is brought to Jesus, it's a difficult challenge. What will He do with a person who has violated and flaunted the design that God has established? So I want us to see four movements in the narrative found in John chapter 8, verse 1 through 11, as they demonstrate how Jesus and you and I should handle conflict. Watch how He demonstrates grace. We've already seen In the last couple of weeks, Jesus teach grace as the storms of life enter our life. We saw how Jesus demonstrates grace to his servants last week. So this morning I want to see these four movements. The first movement is the movement of crime. Look at verses 1 through 3. Beginning in John 7, verse 53, just for context. And everyone went to his own house. Now we start John chapter 8, verse 1. But Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. I wanted to include that previous verse so you know. Everybody's tired. They go home that night. But not Christ. He goes up to the Mount of Olives. He's going to spend some time with his Father. What a great place to be. Verse 2. Now early in the morning he came into the temple, and all the people came to him, and he sat down and taught them. Then the scribes and Pharisees brought to him a woman caught in adultery. And when they had set her in the midst. Pause there for a minute. First we observe the setting. Jesus is teaching in the temple. The temple is the place of spiritual life. It's God's place. It's God's residence. So for all those who are concerned with how to live according to God's way, the place for them to be is the temple of God. Amen? You and I are here for a specific reason. We're here that we might grow and learn more about who God is. So they're in the temple, and the text tells us that Jesus came to the temple. It had been a long day. People kept coming. And he kept teaching on and on. And by this time, the teaching gets interrupted. Listen, a private passion has become a public spectacle. The scribes and the Pharisees have someone they want Jesus to meet. This woman's been caught. The doors were flung open. She was caught in the very act. She was found in the arms with someone who was not her husband. So what had been a private act will now be known to all who will listen to this tale. Everyone stares at her. The posse pushes her through the streets. She is the one who has brought shame onto herself. But we've got to notice that this is all a scheme. According to the law, there had to be 2 eyewitnesses. According to Jewish customs and law, there had to be 2 eyewitnesses if someone is caught into adultery. So it makes one wonder, how long did these witnesses peer through the window of this place where this act was being done? How long did they wait before they fling open the door? How long did they wait? Why didn't they warn her ahead of time? This is wrong. You shouldn't be doing it. It's sin. Don't get caught doing this horrible act. Instead, they wait. Then they catch her in the act and they bring her to Jesus. The crime. Number 2, the catch-22, second part of verse 3. And when they had set her in the midst, they said to her, "Teacher, this woman was caught in adultery, the very act." Now Moses in the law commanded us that such should be stoned. Stoned. Pick up a rock, you just feel the anger, the bitterness, the I'm better than yous. You're caught. You deserve my wrath. What do you say? They asked Jesus. And they're testing him that they might have something which to accuse him. Yeah, this lady's caught. Well, listen to me. She's only the bait. They don't care about this woman. I don't think they cared about the adultery. She's simply a pawn in their game. She's been framed. She knows it. Everyone knows adultery takes two. Where's the man? Why isn't he before them as well? It was just as likely that he might have been part of this scheme as well. It's a setup. And I'm sure this woman has no idea why. The law had been given to the people of Israel for the purpose to guide them in righteousness and in pure living. And yet these leaders, oh my, can I stop and put some parentheses in here? Yeah? Just like many Christians today are taking what God meant for good and are now twisting it as a weapon to condemn. Adultery is one of the many crimes that require the death penalty. It ranked right there alongside of murder, kidnapping, and witchcraft. There's a young man that I know from a previous ministry that put up a meme this week against homosexuality. And I told him, take that down. You're a disgrace to Christianity. You're attacking a human being that Jesus Christ loves. Take it down. But David, you know the Bible. I said, I know God's love and God's grace, and you're not showing either one. Get it down now. He did. You can put any name, any sin you want in there. Shame on us sometimes. Jews, stoning was their way of the death penalty for this particular crime. The person who's the accuser picks up a rock, one that's going to be heavy enough to do damage, and he throws the first one. You can see this arrogance as they're finding a large enough rock to pound this person. You see, adultery is one of these things that they can use to harm and put themselves or elevate themselves above everyone else. Everyone else would fire after the first one does until that person who's been accused is dead, and it's an extremely messy way to die. The scribes and these Pharisees really don't care about this lady, really don't care about this sin of adultery. They're just trying to figure a way, how can they get Jesus? They wanted to present to Jesus a situation that will be impossible for him to get out of. And you see, though they were supposed to be the righteous leaders, just like you Christians, just like us Christians, supposed to represent the righteousness of a nation, their motives are tarnished and their attitudes are godless. They want to get to Jesus. They want to get rid of this preacher of love and grace. So they come up with a scheme. Is Jesus going to obey Moses, or is he going to obey Rome? It's a difficult decision. They felt that they had Jesus no matter what choice he makes. It's clear the law is given that Moses gave said that this person caught should die. So if Jesus set aside the law, the leaders are going to get him in trouble with the people. But if it goes along with this plan of stoning this beautiful woman, then they would get him in trouble with Rome, because Rome says you can't kill anyone unless we give you the authority, because the death penalty is forbidden. And if that happened, then the Romans would come down on this mob rule. So the way they saw it, he can't win. It's a difficult dilemma. We go from the crime to the catch-22 to the conclusion. Jesus' reaction is totally unexpected. He simply doesn't answer them. He does not offer a solution. Instead, he begins to write in the sand. Verse 6. But Jesus stooped down and he wrote on the ground with his finger as though he did not hear. So when they continued asking, he raised himself up and he said to them, "He who is without sin among you, let him throw the first stone at her." And again he stooped down and he wrote in the ground. And then those who heard it, being convicted of their conscience, went out one by one, beginning with the oldest, even to the last. You ever thought about that? What did he write? Everybody wants to know. But instead, for me, what amazes me, the finger that's writing in the sand is the same finger that reached from heaven on the mountain and wrote those 10 commandments in the stone. This finger of God that communicated his purity and righteousness for the people is now stooped down and writing in the sand in front of them. Finger of God would have again come in a time with Daniel on the writing on the wall. It was then that this finger became the judgment of the evil Belshazzar. And in Latin, he wrote, in Aramaic, Mime, tekel upharsin. The meaning of that, which was written on the wall with Belshazzar, simply meant this: you are weighed in the balance and found wanting. So Jesus writes in the sand. You and I are left to speculate what he's writing. The text doesn't indicate what he's writing. I personally think that he is writing some very private sins of those men who were hovering around him. One by one, there's a gigantic pause. No longer is there debate. No longer is there discussion. Simply these men drop the rocks and walk away, one by one. They're convicted of their own sin and their own conscience. These accusers leave and they walk away. There's a fourth movement you and I need to notice. And if you haven't caught anything else I've said today, please hear this. It's a movement of compassion. Verse 9. Jesus was left alone, and the woman standing in the midst. And when Jesus has raised himself up, he saw no one but the woman, and he said to her, "Woman, where are those accusers of you? Has no one condemned you?" She said, "No, no one, Lord." Jesus said to her, please hear me, because we're living in a culture where you're either one of two people. Either you cannot forgive yourself for something that happened way beyond your control, that was so long ago that you just cannot forgive yourself. You're either that person or you are the most condemning, finger-pointing person out there and always accusing someone else. Listen to what Jesus said. Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more. I find something very interesting here. The one who was qualified to point the finger refuses to. Now that the jury's gone, the woman awaits her verdict, and the one who can condemn her does not. The one who has the power to pass judgment amazingly acquits. Words come that this one so desperately wants and needs to hear. Neither do I condemn you. But notice that Jesus' forgiveness does not give this woman to remain and continue in her adultery. You see, when Jesus says, go and sin no more, he's saying, stop making sin the habit of your life. You see, we need to understand this correctly. Jesus never merely excuses sin. He never makes it a place for it. He never rationalizes it. Please hear me. Jesus forgives and forbids in the very same breath. I want to apply all this very quickly. Jesus continues to pass this message on to us. But folks, no longer is this message written in sand. It has now been written on the cross. It's not written in his hand. It's now been written with his blood. And Jesus continues to leave a message for you and I as Christians, not guilty. So many of us live with negative labels. Sometimes they're not our own fault. Sometimes they are our own doing. But as a result, you and I need to see our story not of one of shame and guilt and failure. We need to see us the way Christ sees us. We need to see a story of grace. Grace fixes broken lives. It's grace that heals broken hearts. It's grace that restores estranged sinners. Jesus points us to the place he intended us to be. No longer do we have to live in our past, folks. We don't have to live with some label that somebody put on us a long time ago. We don't have to live a life that's powerless in the face of temptation and sin. Folks, you and I are chosen for something more. We shouldn't ever forget. Grace is free to us, but it is not cheap. Grace is what you and I have been called to imitate. Never forget. Never forget. As Christians, this is the kind of grace that we not only experience, but we exhibit. You and I need to be like Christ and be grace-filled. So let me close. This morning, experience grace. Know today that whatever wrong you have done, no matter what it is or what people think, listen to me, it can be forgiven. Jesus has paid the penalty of your sin, and he freely offers an acquittal. So experience grace. Know it today. Know that God will forgive. Let the past be the past, and go and sin no more. His grace will enable you to be what he intends for you to be. And finally, please, when you walk out of here, exhibit that grace. We too are people of grace. We need to see individuals the way God sees them. A person needs unconditional love today. Are you willing to show it? So, Father, as we close this service today, my desire is that we demonstrate the grace that Jesus exhibits. I don't want to be a condemning Christian. I want to be a grace-filled, compassionate one. Father, continue to teach me, mold me to the image that you've called me to be, and I pray in Jesus' holy name. Amen.